Hi everyone, thank you for checking in, having a little listen to session 2 with really fabulous Claire. I am Claire, and whether or not I'm really fabulous, I think will be up to you to decide over time. But as I mentioned in the previous episode, not really sure whether to call them episodes or sessions or whatever, but anyway, whatever that was, the first one, this is the second one, I did mention that I had previously called this Artist Becoming Human. And then because it made me laugh, and I saw this in a thread that someone, I was looking at titles, asking everyone on Facebook for their input. And I had like 5 suggestions. And someone in the comments thread just said, "Oh, really fabulous, Claire," like referring to my options. And someone underneath him said, "Oh, I like that title actually." And that whole interaction made me laugh. And so just for fun, I decided, well, actually, rather than giving it a serious title, I'll just call it that. But that being said, today I actually do want to talk about being an artist and what that means in this society. Because I have found it really, really hard to be an artist for 2 reasons. One is that where I grew up in the south of England, which is quite conservative. And my social life, apart from my peers, was also quite conservative. Had older parents, lived in conservation belt. I did have the forest, which was amazing. But there was this feeling that you were meant to be one thing for your whole life. And people would always ask you, what are you going to be when you grow up? What are you going to be when you grow up? Which I suppose is somewhat socially acceptable when you're in your like pre-teens, and then maybe even in your teens when you're deciding on A-levels, O-levels, A-levels. And then, of course, quote unquote, of course, you're going to do a degree, and that degree will actually have some relationship to your working life for the rest of your life. And then that's it, you're done. And then people can stop asking you, what are you going to be when you grow up? And weirdly, I could never find an answer to that. I constantly scoured the university sections to see, well, what could I study that feels right to me? And I couldn't find anything when I was in my 17, 18, 19 years, even in my early 20s. So then you hit 30 and you hit 40 and you're still wondering, so what am I going to be when I grow up? And all the while, you're missing your life. All the while, you're missing your life. Because in fact, who you are is who you are. And all of these questions from the outside that don't have any understanding that there is a who you are living inside you, miss it. That means they can't mirror it back. That means they don't know how to ask the right questions for you, like a flower, to become. So what it took for me to find out who I am, which, by the way, is an ongoing journey. Otherwise, life would be pretty dull. So the who I am kind of came to me in my mid-20s when I had this calling to just leave my country. So there I was living in England, tucked away in kind of the countryside, suburban countryside. We were still on the London Underground, but quite far out. And I had this longing. I had this desperate longing for something, and I kept starting new jobs, leaving the jobs, and I was even working in the entertainment industry. Notice the word industry. But it was fun. I worked in music publishing, I worked for record labels, I worked for entertainment lawyers. And so I was kind of on the inside of things. But I literally had no idea that I was creative and no idea at all that I had anything to discover. Even though I had a longing that ached. and longing for connection, a longing for understanding, a longing for a feeling that my train was on the right tracks, on any tracks, actually. So I had this sensation, I just need to go to America. And I'd been visiting the States, mostly on the East Coast, for a few years, you know, and I'd go for a month or a couple of months. I was temping in London at that point. I'd given up trying to have, quote unquote, a proper job. And the temping gave me the opportunity to travel and come back and travel and come back, you know, and save money for the traveling. And during that time, I'd have all these adventures. And I remember one time I ended up in Nashville, Tennessee, which I actually didn't know existed at the time. And I had been kind of secretly learning how to play the saxophone in London through a book called Floodlights, which basically turned the whole of London into this nighttime adventure playground where you could go to any of the normal school buildings or any kind of community building and they'd be doing something magical in there, like learn the saxophone. And that's actually where I met one of my boyfriends who followed me to the States once I moved here, but that's a whole nother story. So I happened to be watching television late one night in the UK with this feeling of longing, like I wasn't satisfied and I didn't know what to do about that. Kind of like being hungry and you keep looking in the fridge, but the fridge is the same. Like there's not suddenly a brand new chocolate cake sitting in there waiting for you. And it was that same feeling, this feeling of dissatisfaction, of emptiness. And yet the longing could exist because it knew that there was something more for me and that I had to learn how to follow that feeling. And so I did. I was watching television, and then, as always happened, about 11 o'clock at night, they'd show an episode of Frasier, and then an episode of Cheers, and then maybe another episode of Frasier. And I was kind of hooked. And in part, it's because it was in the States. So I was doing those short trips to the States, and then suddenly they showed on the news the Mission Dolores Park with those Victorian houses, the sort of pastel-coloured Victorian houses, pinks and blues, all very cheerful and happy looking. And I had that profound feeling that happens sometimes that sank into my bones. And it just said, Claire, go here. Just go here. And I was a bit shocked because I knew I was going to. And just to give you a little bit of a side story, I had also fairly recently had 2 conversations of significance. One with one of my best friends, Bridget, and one with one of my brothers, Tim. My best friend, Bridget, just said, and this is classic English speak, by the way, she said, Claire, for God's sake, you've been bleating on about going to the States for 2 years. Just go already. And I didn't know that. I had no idea that I'd been going on about it. And then my brother Tim kind of hurt my feelings in a way. And sometimes, you know, that's what it takes. But he just said, Claire, you're unhappy. Go and find your tribe. Just go and find your tribe. And again, it's like, I don't know what this language means. But these conversations were reverberating in the halls of my memory. And then I saw Mission Dolores Park on the news. And then 2 weeks later, I was on a plane. And I was in Oakland. I knew one person here, and I didn't know her well. Her name was Rachel. She was an artist. And I was able to stay on their couch for a couple of weeks whilst I kind of oriented myself and started my life. The first house I lived in was actually leased by a mandolin player that I met in a coffee shop. And so it was music actually that brought me here. It was music that brought me to Nashville. It was music that brought me into the first place I lived in the East Bay. And now I haven't even started on why be an artist, have I? I mean, I've really told you the journey that got me to a point where I started to explore what it means to be me. And during that process, I learned that I was an artist. During that process, I learned that I was creative. And to be honest, I am like madly creative. It's crazy to me to think that all of this side of me, all of the who I am, was unbeknownst to me. It existed inside me, but I was looking the other way. It was kind of like I was standing on the top of a mountain, longing at this view on the horizon, and there, right under my feet, was this mountain that I am. I wasn't looking down, I was looking forwards. And in that seeking, I didn't know, and this is so true for so many of us, I didn't know that, and this sounds so blooming cheesy, and it doesn't mean anything until it means something. But I didn't know all of it, all the answers, all the feeling at home, all the excitement, all the belonging lived inside me, in me. And that my job was to touch it, to reach out, to tentatively become, to boldly step forwards into the places that I hadn't been yet. These are hard things to do without a guide. So I had to gingerly kind of feel my way forward, and I regret that. I regret that I felt so alone in finding out who I was on this planet. This planet with billions of people. This planet of beauty, of profound sensitivity. And so the reason I was originally going to call this podcast Artists Becoming Human is because I feel like I knew myself originally through the forest where I grew up, through the stony beaches of Aldborough in Suffolk where I also grew up. And yet the way to fulfill myself was that I had to leave the lands that I knew in order to become an artist. So initially I was a human who had to become an artist, but then during that process of being an artist, learning what it means to me to be an artist, I then became human. That is hard. All of it's hard. And I remember I used to fight my sister. She'd say, "Oh, life is hard, Claire." And I'd have these awful new age speaks where I'd go, "No, it's not. It's what you make it." And I kind of lived in this sort of Peter Pan land until I started to commit to myself, my life, without all the rules, but seriously in kind of an adventure mode, which of course means lots of bruises, lots of cut knees, lots of broken hearts. So I'm going to try and keep these podcasts relatively short. And I guess maybe in the next one, I can talk a bit more about why be an artist, as if we have a choice, of course, I said, ironically. But what does it mean to be an artist? What does it mean to be an artist in this kind of westernized society that is focused on other ways of celebrating how people can be? In other words, having a 9-to-5 job, doing one job only, being reliable, things like that, being organized, like all those sort of mechanical parts. I think there's many of us, and I think this is why we have such a high suicide rate amongst artists, by the way. But I think there are many of us that need a different way of living, that need something that relies on a universal basic income, because it is no longer appropriate to force people to consider themselves with small parameters when we are metaphysically designed to be extraordinary. Thank you for listening. Hande